Hello, welcome to another edition of Low Code Campfire. This is the 168th edition for Friday, October 18, 2024. I am Dale Warner, Head of Support for Plant and App, joined with today by Patrick Anderson, Technical Success Manager for Plant and App. And we are here to talk with you about all things Plant and App and low code. This is an event we do every Friday, this hour, 10 a.m. Central Time. We talk about Plant and App. We talk about the things that we're working on and rolling out, the projects we're working on, but mostly it's the questions that you have and the ability to talk about them, maybe get some benefit from the other campers here around the campfire. So bring something, bring a question. We record all of these, put them on YouTube. So youtube.com/plantanapp has all these 167 previous episodes. You're invited to go to that, sign up, hit the alarm bell so that you'll know when we post new content, which is usually in the hours following the event. We'll run this agenda today where we say hello because this is a nice friendly meeting format, and then we'll go around the campfire. We have a couple of submitted topics. We'll always do first call, and then maybe we'll get to some of these other things. But after an hour or so, we'll go into our afterglow segment. That's where we turn off the recording and just enjoy each other for a little bit more. So do jump in, engage with us, show and tell us what you're working on. I have, since the very first episode, threatened to sing if you don't participate, and I just throw that slide in here today. I'm not worried about your participating today, but please participate next week too, because Patrick is going to be hosting. I'm going to be away and not even working in an undisclosed location, not working at all. You can submit questions and topics in advance. You can use this QR code or simply send an email to support@plantanapp.com. Hello, all.
Morning.
Hello.
Good
Morning.
morning.
Happy Friday. I'm particularly aware of it being Friday since I'm like, hours away from starting vacation.
Can't get this over fast enough.
No, I didn't say that, but did anyone come with something that we should chew on first? First call.
I do have a quick question, and hopefully it'll be quick. And that's I've mentioned an app that I'm developing where somebody is collecting some information on a cell phone and sending it to me in a JSON string. And what I thought I would do was just receive the string and store it and say thanks and be done. And that's the process to interact with the phone. But I want to do something with the JSON. And so I figured I would use an automation. And I know that there's automations for if something in SQL changes, but that's the extent of my knowledge of that. So what's the simple mechanism to use? What's the best in class, I guess, mechanism to use for processing those incoming JSONs?
Great question. Let me get signed in here and we'll take a look at it. Of course, with automations always start off with triggers. You can as you're developing them, you can click on them and run them manually at any time. But then the whole point behind automations is that you can establish some kind of a trigger, and so you're talking about a database trigger, and that's just one class of database trigger, one class of trigger, and then we'll talk about some other ones too. But let's look at triggers. If you add a trigger to an automation, and you were talking about database, you get 4 choices. when a record gets inserted into the database is probably the thing you're looking at. So you've got something else going on that's you're getting the data back from the phone, and you're going to throw data into some table somewhere, some entity, and you're going to want things to take action. So this is probably the one that you're after. You the only parameter that you have for it is a table name, and oftentimes I use, for example, book as a table name. If you look at this is the table that's getting watched. Um, so for your case, you could have it if your responses were going into an entity called mobile responses, you could just select that table out of the list, and then every time something gets inserted, you're going to get this automation is going to start up. What you get, when it starts up is it's telling you that if you hover this, and you can see what you're gonna get, you're going to get column name syntax. So if you have a column name called uploaded JSON in the table, when this runs, you're going to get uploaded JSON as a token ready to work with. I would say as a best practice, I mean, what I find myself doing these days is with a plant and app entity, those always have an ID, and so you're going to have a column called bracket ID. And what I typically do is create a workflow or one or more workflows to do the work of however you want to process that thing. And the input to the workflow would be the ID of what you want to process. So that makes it nice and easy testable from as you're developing the workflow. You can hand it a record ID, get it to do whatever it is you're doing. So in your case, parsing the JSON. And so then now in the workflow, it's very testable, repeatable. So you could just test the workflow, make sure it's doing what you expect. And then you come into automation and say, well, I'm going to execute the workflow. And I'll find them. I don't know if I have one for books here, but I have workflows listed. And so I can execute, let's see if I have one. Yeah. Well, it doesn't. I don't have one. So, but you pick your workflow that you've developed, and it takes some kind of an input, and I would just pass it the ID field as the starter. So the job
No.
triggers
So
when you
the
get a new database.
columns you mentioned for the trigger then generates a token for each column?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So I could get the ID. For instance, if I wanted to update the column and change a field called processed to true, to say, yeah, I took care of this,
Mm-hmm.
uh, I could just add a partial entity update at the end of the action the workflow that I create.
Yes.
And then I could use the tokens as variables to, so the JSON field, I can parse the JSON into objects and do all the other stuff that I would want to do, and then all the other things in the workflow. And then at the end of it, I could say update that entity because I have a token called ID, whatever the field for ID is. I assume
Yes.
it's ID. Okay, cool. That's fantastic. And then
So
then that's it. I mean, whenever I insert something into that record, the automation will do it, and I don't have to go back and check or look at anything or,
uh
I mean,
so from a yeah, in a perfect world, that would be the end of it. Um, Odd things can happen in I mean, if your system goes down while it's processing whatever. This is built to be pretty resilient, and we, uh, for example, when an update happens at the database level, we are behind the scenes, we're keeping track of what records need to be processed. And so this in 99.9% of the cases should run. But the field that you were talking about a little while ago, where you have something that you have a status that it's new and then it's processed. Uh, if you want to be 100% certain that things get processed, you could build an additional automation that um, queries for new records and runs that same workflow. So it would be kind of a load records from SQL looking for new, and then run that once a day or once an hour or something like that to just clean up anything that if an error happened in your workflow and it never got marked as processed, whatever the condition is. So you might, as a belt and suspenders kind of approach, you might put in an additional job. But yes, this should run, you know,
One
99.
last question about the
Yeah.
trigger, and that is if there are two people out there in the world that are processing on their phones and it comes in pretty much simultaneously, I'm not going to have an issue of missing one of the inserts because I was busy processing the
Right.
first automation.
We take care of that. You don't. This database trigger is going to run for that for both once for both records
Oh, okay.
separately. Yeah. But while we're talking about triggers, let's talk about warnings. There is one of the um, one of the triggers is on database update. So anytime a record gets updated, this is going to run. So let's say that we put this on same thing on book. So a record, this is going to run when it gets inserted. This is going to get run when it's anything on the record gets updated. And the problem is if your process, and then you should see a warning here. Um, this you can set up an infinite loop, right? If you did a partially update on book as part of this automation, that's going to set up another update, which will then trigger this job to run again. So you just have to be careful not to do that. We
Right.
have another trigger, another database trigger on database update column, which is very similar, but it's based on when the book status, for example, or name. This will update when either of these two columns get updated. This trigger will run, but not if you update other things. So this is a tool you can use if you know you're going to update book, but you can just uh, focus on the columns that you're updating. Just have to be careful you don't do an infinite loop.
Yeah, exactly. It's not for my application. It's I'm not going to get an entry, an insert, unless the phone has finished its work. So the app is done and it says, okay, here it is. This is what just happened. So now I have this new record. And so that'll be the insert. I would just trigger on the insert. I wouldn't trigger on the rest of them. But I like the idea of putting in a kind of a fail safe, running once a night, seeing if there's anything that's sitting there in the hadn't been processed state. And if that's the case, send me an email just as a warning rather than do anything about it. Just say, hey, your system's not working right. And then I can figure it out from there. But that sounds great. Thank you. Thank you.
Absolutely. Um, Patrick, do you have any other hints or comments about triggering and experience with database triggers?
No, I think you covered. We put that big warning on there, but and I think it's good that it's there, but just like Dale was saying, it's also really useful to understand the difference between the database update and update column because it can be really useful to update a table, to have a trigger on a table, then and then make an update to that same table. But um, that's what the update column's for. And as long as you don't update one of the columns you're monitoring, then you should avoid loop.
Right.
While we're here, I just thought I would point out the update is kind of special because in addition to getting the columns, you get a column name before. So for example, if you had a description field, you get the bracket description is the after version, the way it is after the update, but you also get description : before, would show you a before and after, so you can see what changed in your record and do something with that. So that's fun. Good question. Anybody else with something they brought to want to talk about? Let's do other things. There was a suggestion, this was from 2 weeks ago, asking questions about razor tokens. Do razor tokens round trip when executed? And I'm throwing Patrick under the bus here several times today. Patrick, what do you know about razors and round trips?
I'm not sure I totally understand the question. The person who asked it is not on the call, right?
I didn't have a name on this one.
Okay.
Anybody want to claim it? But so let's say, for example, that let's see, razor tokens are back-end things. Let's say that you had a listing that put a razor token in every row. So that razor token would get executed once per row that comes out. Yeah, but that's kind of my meager understanding of razor tokens is that a script gets generated out on the server and then executed, and the result comes back. And so I would expect that that if you had a repetitive token, that would be happening over and over again, unless you took advantage of caching. So I think
that sounds right to me. Yeah, I don't think I know any more than that.
But tokens are happening on the back end, so I guess thinking about like a form and a round trip, when you click submit on a form, that's kind of a round trip to the server. Before, I mean, the form's sitting running on your browser, clicking and click the button. Now the server gets involved and then comes back with a response. I think that's kind of that's to me where round trip normally comes in. So is anybody claiming this question, or we just leave it there?
Yeah, I think I claim it. This is Mark. And I think you answered it. You know, I was thinking along the lines of reducing network traffic and something as simple as like format a date. If I wanted to format a date, I could make a razor token to do that, but it seemed like that would cause a lot of back and forth just for that purpose. So I was trying to figure out where the best way to approach it.
I think so. And I think that Ben's probably going to chime in here because I see his hands up. But I just wanted to real quick say that I think that a razor token to do formatting a date would be better than, because you could also format a date with SQL, right? But I think that my understanding is that a razor token would be better and faster than doing it with SQL. Let's see what Ben has to say. Or was Matt's hand up first? I don't know. They both have their hands up.
Let's go.
Yeah,
I'll be moderator. Ben is off mute. No, Ben, you go.
Okay. Yes, I'm gonna agree with Patrick. When you are doing anything that you have a choice of doing razor versus SQL, you always want to pick razor first, because in most cases, people will separate their IIS web server from their SQL server. It's a completely different machine. So if you're talking about network traffic, SQL will instigate network traffic. Razor will not, because Razor is going to the web server and sticking on the web server and running locally, and then just returning the data back to the client browser. So that is going to be centered within that one server. However, if you do SQL and you have multiple servers, then your IIS server will have to reach out to your SQL server, which will then cause network traffic, wait for the SQL to do what it needs to do, return the data back to the IIS, and then IIS has to then propagate that down to the client. So if you ever have an opportunity to do something Razor, that is definitely going to be option one, because it's going to work much faster than if you do something through SQL.
So Matt,
Great answer. Thanks, Ben.
are you still on this? Got to chime in, Matt?
Well, actually, no, I had a different question, so I'll just wait.
Okay. And then in the, like on the topic of formatting, I've seen we have the execute JavaScript server side action, and a lot of formatting can, especially with dates and numbers and other things, can happen there. And I suspect that also is not round tripping to the SQL server. So that's another option for that. Cool.
But that would be round tripping to the IIS server, though, right? If
Yes,
it's on the
as
server.
as is Razor, right? If you're doing a Razor token, it's got a IIS gets involved to
Yeah, sure. Accepted. I was just thinking, I'd much rather do it locally on the client's computer. So trying to figure
yep.
that out.
In that case, I think you could probably you could do it with JavaScript if you had the, so that's a not a JavaScript server side action, but with JavaScript, just
Yeah, the Java, if you want to keep it on the client, the JavaScript would have to be embedded directly in the module. You can't do it through an action. So no action stack JavaScript. It would have to be on a bind JavaScript.
Why not a action stack JavaScript? I think I would
you
like
could
to
do
have that.
The moment you include the action stack, that is a round trip to the IIS server. That's a given. It has to be executed through a button click. That will immediately send a post back to the IIS server. You're getting the IIS server involved.
That
If
makes sense.
you bind the JavaScript, then it runs on the browser and it never actually does a post back. Sorry, Patrick, go ahead.
So I was gonna say, so we have 3 JavaScript actions. We have a server side execute JavaScript server side, and then we have a execute JavaScript and stop execution, and execute JavaScript and continue execution. Those 2 actions are actually client side actions, and you can set a button to not submit, and if you set it up that way and stop execution, you actually don't get that. You are staying on the client side in that scenario. So that is possible, but the server side JavaScript action, definitely that is not a client side action.
Okay,
I will just add a caveat to that, Patrick. I would say be careful with that logic, only because if you have anything else in the action stack that does require that you do the post back, you're going to break that logic with the return false.
Well, yeah, so that's why we have the 2 JavaScript actions. One is JavaScript code and continue execution. So if you continue execution, and so that would still the JavaScript action is happening client side, but then you might have a subsequent action that does do the round trip to the server. And in that case, you would be doing a submission, but not at the point that you're doing this action right here.
So I'm gonna try and learn something today, because I would have I thought Ben's original statement was correct, that if it's in an on-click handler, that these are being served by, even this would be provided by, and it runs on the browser, but it's being provided after the round trip. Is that not true?
I don't think so. Okay, so I might be wrong, I guess, but my understanding of this has really been that if you at any point are stopping the execution before you get to a final action, then you are it's no longer a submit at that point.
A part of me thinks, I mean, I could be wrong too, because you guys would know better than me, but I would tend to think that's not the case. I think anything in the action stack will always have to go to the IIS. The IIS is going to return something. Now, if you do a return false, or the stop, it means anything after that's not going to execute, but anything that has been processing prior to that, it has to do that round trip. Like that, the action of the button click is immediately doing a postback, because these actions, they're stored on the IIS server, on the database. They're not sent down to the client. The client has no clue what the action stack is until you hit that button, which means it has to go to the IIS, retrieve the data, and figure it out.
Yeah, and Dale's about to show that it does do that. It does. Yep, that's correct. Yep. There's an API call.
So that was the round trip. It does.
Yep.
When you click the button, it does do that. So I think, on the other
Didn't you
hand,
say
we
something though about having that submit off?
Causes validation.
Causes validation.
I don't. That's just.
No.
Yeah, that's
just
just determining.
that.
Yeah.
The only way around it would be, sorry, Patrick, I keep cutting in. The binding expression of the button.
Right.
If you put
do a return
JavaScript in
false
there and a return false there, that return false will prevent anything in the action stack from running. It'll immediately terminate, because the on change click runs first before the call posts back to the IIS server to run the action stack. So if you put anything in the action stack and you put a return false here, the action stack is going to be completely ignored.
So here we are looking at the network traffic. We do JS test. We didn't get anything, and that's good. Let's just kind of close the loop here. I'm going to open this form and return true so we can see it all at work. That was on our bind expression. I suppose I could have just omitted the true, but let's try it this way. So we refresh. So this first alert happens without anything, and then we say okay, and then the second alert happens after this post back. So if the form, for example, had images or whatever, that post back might take a while, because it would be, or a lot of data would be transmitting it up, and then who knows what comes back down, and then the actions start to run. So good understanding of the separation. All right, so now back to the original question. You could, in a button, do some formatting in the bind expression that had nothing to do with, it would be running on the browser or on the bind expression of any field element, you could do some reformatting and put it back there, and it would avoid that round trip. But once it's an action on a button in the on-click handler, that's going to be an API call to the server. Cool.
Well, thanks for covering that. Thanks, everybody.
All right, so then Matt put his hand up a long time ago. What do you got?
A couple of questions. First of all, what's the difference? Does anybody know the difference between the is deleted status in the user profile and the is deleted status in the user portals? Right now, it looks like when you soft delete somebody using, say, a form or whatever, it updates the user portals, doesn't touch the user itself. Is there obviously there's a difference. Apparently, if you've got multiple portals, then you can delete them out of one but not another, or so it would seem. Just any insight on that from anybody?
To my knowledge, the one that is attached to the user is just a deprecated value that is never used. Only the
Okay.
portal one is used.
All right. Thank you. That's what I thought. I appreciate it. The other thing I'm seeing is when I'm importing users from a workflow, I'm not getting them set to be authorized, despite the workflow having the user import set to authorize new users. Has anybody else seen that? Or
My experience is that it does work.
You're talking about
Mm.
the creation of a new user, and there's a checkbox.
correct.
Yeah.
And then specifically in a workflow, it appears to work in a form, but I think I'm having problems with it in a workflow.
So in user management, our menu is so long here.
Yeah,
There's an authorized user. There's what? It's a
I think it's
user registration.
I think that's it.
Yeah.
So user registration has an authorize.
Right. And in a form, I'm pretty sure that worked just fine. I think, and this is all brandy new, so that's why I'm asking now, whether or not that's actually working in a workflow.
Okay. I don't have an answer, but we could do it real quick.
Okay. Good.
Just have one action. Side it was user registration, and so we will S2410 will be my user, and it's also going to be my password, and it's also going to be everything here. And this should change my user context and authorize me all at one time, right? Unless in a workflow, unless I take steps to keep up with my ID before and log myself back in, this is going to change who I am. But let's save and test. So it has no inputs. It's just going to log me in And so we run it, and it says it ran. And now if I refresh this, let's see who I am here. Okay, it didn't do what I was expecting. Let's look at users and see if it created them. So here it is, it's created and it's authorized. And so we should be able to log in with that. We'll go incognito here and try and log in with it. So I would say it should work. Right? So if you're running into something different, that's an issue.
Yeah, I'm going to, yeah, I've got it set up just that way, authorize, and then not, like I had several hundred imported, all not authorized. So,
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. So we give it a username, password, and you're filling in all the blanks. So I assume all those are coming from tokens. You're doing it in some
Yep.
kind of a loop.
Correct.
So let's do this.
Can you scroll to the top of yours, please, Dale?
Sure.
User registration. Yeah, okay.
But I think what maybe, let's do another one here. Actually, let's do it as we'll do it by token. So
Yeah.
we'll call it the user, and here, 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 and authorize. But I'm going to also add, I think for the duration of this workflow, after you do this, your user context changes. And let's see if that's true. So I'm going to do a log event and say, do an admin alert that says, so this is who I'm trying to create. This is who I am, and save that. And then for an input, we need to have the user, and oh, that's fine. And we'll give it a value. So save and test, and we'll say, oops, and it did it. We look at the updates. See, at this point, your name, you are that user, and your context would have shifted for the duration of that workflow. And my concern would be if you tried if you're in a big loop doing 100, and once you do it for the first one, you are now, your context has changed to that user. You might not have the rights to create a user as that user. So you may want to make a sub workflow that does the actual creation. I think what happens is your context is going to exist for the duration of whatever workflow that you're in. So if you create the user in a subordinate workflow, that when you return, you're going to come back as yourself. Right? It doesn't.
Is it possible that the Matt, if you check it, that the first user you imported was authorized, and then subsequent ones were not?
That I haven't been able to check that yet, Patrick.
Mm-hmm.
That's a possibility. So this is a sub workflow, and it's basically doing register the user. I then load the user, and this all may be related, but they were not picking up the grant user role. They weren't picking up, I have to actually go in and add them as a user in the user's role, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
Then I just added the authorized user to this. Yeah. So I've been using this approach for some time. I've expanded it and refined it, but it had been working. That's what's kind of bothering me.
So I'm going to test to see if what I told you was actually the truth.
Hmm.
So we're going to create a user that's going to be called, I'm just going to create one here. Coded, and then export that and import it back. And wire it in here. This is the username. This is after creation. And then we end. Run it. So here we have this is old one. Here's where we start. So before it's my name, a new user gets created. At that point, in that workflow, you have that context. And then when you return, you're back to you. So your context only exists through the called workflow, and then it returns back. So you could take advantage of that to know that you have the rights to do the things you want to do. Yeah. For example, if you create a workflow that does all the creation things and is testable to say this thing creates an authorized user and then call it from another workflow, I think that might go around the problem because you're creating it based on the context of whoever you are. Otherwise, you can use a load user. But the answer is they're getting created authorized.
All right. So in my case, this is all in a sub workflow. The first thing I do is register the new user. And what I originally was kind of getting at was the authorized did in the user registration action, the authorized for me is not working. It seemed to work for you, so I'm not sure what the difference is. Then I next load the user, just as a belts and suspenders thing, I guess, and then do a bunch of other things. I've put a separate action here just based on this conversation, just to authorize that current user, so I can fix this problem. And then it goes back to the parent. It does a few other things, but then it basically goes back to the parent workflow.
So this is one of those weird areas that when First of all, what you just said, you said it was a belt and suspenders. That so when you register the user, you are at that point acting as that user, and so you should
Mm-hmm.
be able to run the authorize without anything more. But you're doing a load user, and you might be doing other load users. I want to caution you that um, the authorize user action, and I think grant user roles also, they authorize every user that they do that action for every user loaded in the current context.
The
And
grant user
so,
role action actually has a new, recently was changed. It has a property
okay,
to specify whether or not you're to
Y-
to specify whether or
well,
not you're using the
well,
user in context. Yeah.
well, let's pull that one
Right.
up in a second. So let's
Yeah.
talk about this one. This one, if you use authorize, if you use this action, and you
Yeah.
have you started as yourself, you created a user, maybe you created several users in a loop. When you run this action, it's doing all of them, everybody who's been load user in the current context. And it's a really um, it's not very intuitive, but I just wanted to point out that that
Hmm.
actually was taking place. And then let's look at grant. Um, role is
Yeah, this looks like the slightly older user interface, because my user interface for both the user registration and the grant role are um, different than that, slightly different than that. 126.
it's possible that
Yeah, 277. You're on 279. That's weird.
Well, does it
Okay,
look right? Does
that's
it look? Yeah, he was in the
that.
old view.
Okay,
Yeah.
screwing me all up here. All right, so yes, that looks fine. Two user role validity. Yep.
so this one, my read of this is that it's not doing all users in context, but rather just the currently logged in user. But that's the way it reads. Anyway,
So in this little workflow you've got here, because you've shown that the user registration then puts that new user in context.
mhm.
So therefore that grant user role would be in that user in that context only, as far as what you're saying or what
Right.
we
Right.
know.
You wouldn't need to load the user. You said you were loading the
Okay.
user, and you wouldn't need to do that.
So for example, we're going to create a user here, and then we'll turn right around and let's grant the manager role to this user that we create. We're not specifying who we're sending it to, and so we'll go ahead and run it. And this would be, I'm going to call this, sorry, 10 manager here, running it. So if we go look at users, got created and got the manager
Yeah.
role. We didn't specify who, it just did it automatically without a load user.
Okay.
Anyway, if they're
Hmm.
coming in unauthorized, stare at it a while, bang your head, and then maybe open a support ticket.
Yep.
Give me all
Okay.
the
Thank
details
you.
you can. All right. Good one. I'm going to back up here just to make sure I didn't miss anything. This is a good one to talk about. I got the Campfire site here, and we have some updates to apply, and I thought I would just apply them and talk about some stuff we did with search. If you're now I'm stalling, waiting for it to refresh here. Okay, so before installing the updates, if you use search at all, the characteristic of this is that when you first set up search or make changes, it will go and do an index, but then every 10 minutes it's checking to see if there's new things that it needs to add to the indexes. So that's the incremental aspect of it. We changed this so that to give you more control over it, rather than just saying it's going to be every 10 minutes, we're going to create a job. So um, I'm going to install these updates, and then we'll see the differences. Is there anything I should point to, Patrick, before I install the hot fixes? That
Um, I mean, you could show that. So go to back to search again and just so right there, where underneath the current behavior where it says site search, we're going to see a new feature there when after you do the update.
yeah. So let's do that, and then it's going to throw some jobs in automation, right?
Yes, right.
So you can see what jobs I have here. The last one is number 62, and that's it. So I suspect we're going to see job 63 added. All right, so let's do updates, and we can talk about what is going to be added while it's updating. So I'm going to just install everything here. But notice we have changes in automation scheduler and in search, and I guess I'll show you this, that if you're looking at it in replay, you can see the things that are being installed here, but it's going from every 10 minutes to once per day. All right, let's get those rolling. So what I believe we did is that we have extracted this indexing thing to be something that is an action that you can put inside a job, and we're creating the job for you and automatically setting that up to run once per day. Is that
Yeah,
accurate?
we did have an indexing action before, but the indexing action has some new features to it as well. It now has so the biggest change here is that indexing is multi-threaded, whereas before it was always queued. So whenever you indexed your if you have multiple behaviors, your behaviors will be put into a queue for indexing. And now there's the option, and that's an important thing. It's an option to have indexing happen um, at the same time. So behaviors can be indexed at the same time. Um, and that's one of the options. That's one of the new options that's in that action. But also, when you're in search, if you go to one behavior and tell it to reindex, and then go to another behavior and tell it to reindex, the default behavior there when you do that is that they are going to run they're going to run immediately in separate processes. So they both will start indexing, which was not an option before. One of the reasons for this was that it was causing confusion that you would with multiple behaviors, that you would click reindex, and it would say now indexing, but then you wouldn't see anything happening on the dashboard of the behavior. So this is
So probably one of the biggest things about this is going to happen for you when you get to 126 and above, and when you start installing these, it's going to do this, and it is a change of behavior that um, before search was automatically staying up to date every 10 minutes, and that's kind of a problem because I mean, we're making an assumption for you. We want the indexes to be as fresh as possible, but these things are running now every 10 minutes, and it's a drag on your server. So when we change to our new default of once per day, if you have a site that is getting that needs to be indexed on a more frequent schedule, and you didn't pay attention to this change, you would notice your site being behind until the indexer ran. So if you need this, you need to configure your job. Anyway, so here we are. We've got this search, and now we have configure indexing schedule. So this sends us to an automation job that it's created for us automatically. See, it's number 63 on search index search behavior site 1. So we've got a trigger that comes in by default once every 24 hours. If you want this to go back to every 10 minutes, you could certainly adjust that. In terms of actions, we have an index behavior action that is indexing. You've got all of your behaviors listed here. This one is for site search, and it's telling it it's going to do an incremental index, so the additional indexing. So this is defaulting to the same type of indexing that was happening before. This is the thing that.
Yeah, these are the two new properties right here that weren't in the index behavior action before.
So if you want things to happen in a hurry, you can and more intense processing, you can do this, and then this is a typical. I'm sorry, is this option new?
So yes, it is. If it's already indexing, it will cancel the indexing in progress and restart it.
But among other things, this action is useful if you completely re-indexing a site is something that, I mean, sometimes indexes can become corrupt due to stuff that goes on the server. So you can use this action, for example, whether you want to set it up as a one-time thing or an ongoing thing to just completely redo your indexing to in the middle of the night to remove, to ensure that there is no corruption. That would be an option to create a job that would do that. But this is new. Is there any other new stuff we should be looking at?
Yeah, under search. Yeah.
So these show up as regular jobs in your automation listing. So now we have these two new ones. So you can access it by going to automation and seeing them here, or from search. And when you're working with an, you can get to it there.
And then the other thing I was talking about is that if you click and you really, in order to even see this, you really would have to have you'd have to be indexing something that's going to take a long time. But basically, so site search here, if you click reindex, it'll start running this index, and maybe it'll work. Go ahead and click reindex and say okay, and then now switch to the tests search.
You can see this gets going, and it's got some work going on.
And now you can tell it to reindex this. And it starts going there. And now if you switch back to site search is probably still going. So this is what was not possible before, is for you to be doing reindexing on two different behaviors at the same time.
So the short version is, once you install this update, you're going to have this new indexing controlled by an automation. And if you need something faster than once per day to reindex, you need to come in and give it some attention as an administrator. Otherwise, it'll do once per day. Any questions on any of that? We're hitting the top of our hour, so I'm going to work through to the last things, which is a quick promo for Low Code Cafe coming up this Wednesday. Patrick will be doing it, and he's going to be dealing with techniques for record versioning, which I think we've discussed here in Campfire quite a bit, and some of you will probably recognize some of the concepts that he's going to introduce. Any promo you want to do, or just say everyone should come?
No, yeah, that covers it, and yeah, please come.
I'm going to watch it in replay. Thanks for spending your hour with us. We will do it again next Friday. And by we, I mean Patrick. And then in a moment here, we'll adjourn to Afterglow, and you're welcome to hang with us and just enjoy hanging out for a few more minutes. Great. See you next week.